Whenever we have standing and whenever there's a harm, there must also be a remedy or the court will dismiss the case. Well, what's the remedy for lack of representation? More representation. Everybody wins in this. And we have several methods of attack planned to do it. The first is with the declaration. If California allows us to separate peacefully, we form a state that represents the people in it, represents their history, their moral integrity, their cultural and economic values, and gives representation to each county with a state senator in a part-time legislature. And we're not going to need 571 state agencies, I don't think. So if you have representation on the state level, then you will be able to express the needs of Butte County. And that's the most important part of this. The state of Jefferson will not. Yes.
We're at 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Yeah. Let me close this up. There were some guys in Woodrow Wilson's administration, Bernays and Creasy, I think his name was, and they were sent out to convince the American public to join World War I. Well, Bernays, he hated the term propaganda. He thought it sounded bad. So he created the term public relations in order to get past that. And they then stumped the country in order to change people's minds to enter World War I, and they were obviously successful at that. So we're mounting a public relations campaign, and what we would like to do is we would like to help people understand how this would be a win-win for California. Southern California would be able to keep the money. They would be able to address problems that we can't even understand. We would be free to create a constitutional state that represents the people, their needs, their interests, their moral and historical imperatives. The difference between constitutional republic and tyranny is simple. And I've been to all these countries. I've been to Bulgaria, Romania, CAR, DAR, all of them. Under a constitutional republic, you wake up in the morning and you know that the law is there to protect everyone equally. It protects your ability to use the assets you went out and earned to make a living for yourself and your family. Under a tyrannical form of government, you wake up in the morning and you say, what is the government going to do to me today? And what I'd like to ask you, ladies and gentlemen, is what kind of government would you like for Butte County? Thank you.
Hey, I got a question for him.
Got a question? All right, I was going to ask it. All right.
We don't let the top guys clap.
Huh?
We don't let the top guys clap.
Yeah. So,
Mr. Baird, I've got a couple of questions
if
for you.
you can come back up to the lectern,
step
please.
back up to the microphone. There have been a number of comments by folks up and down the state. Something like this is never going to happen. It's too hard. How would you address that?
Well, in a couple of ways. Christmas Eve, 1775, George Washington was in his office, and he was writing something on little scraps of paper, and he was tearing them off, and they were falling on the floor. And Benjamin Rush walked in the room, and he picked one of those pieces of paper up, and he read it, and it said, "Liberty or death." That was the password for the attack on Trenton on the next day. Those guys walked 20 miles with no shoes, crossed an icy river, marched 20 more miles, fought, and marched again and fought again. Jimmy Doolittle on the deck of the Hornet with 80 20-year-olds about to go to Tokyo, knowing that they didn't have enough gas to get back. And they went anyway. I'm really glad that Jimmy and George didn't say, you know what, too tough for me, and let's go have a sandwich. We used to be known as...
Wait, please, no clapping. You know,
we used to be known...
We need to get moving on our agenda, so...
We used to be known as a tough people. We are tough. We can do this, and we can do 100 times more if we put our minds to it. We are the people.
Thank you. And I have one other question. It's also been asked a number of times, how can we possibly survive without the state social service welfare money that we would lose as a 51st
That's an excellent question. There are two avenues that come to mind as a response to that. First of all, California has $1.1 trillion in debt. It is not a question of whether Jefferson can survive, because the LAO says if we separate now, we'll only be responsible for 3% of the debt that California admits to, which is $140 billion, manageable. If we wait 10 years, we won't be able to separate because we could never manage 3% of $10 trillion. The question isn't whether Jefferson can survive, it's can we get away from California before the ship goes down with all hands. That economic engine has been on the same track for 50 years, and it's a failure, and it's getting worse by the day. The other answer is PILT. How long has it been since Fish and Game paid their PILT in Butte County? Well, in the state of Jefferson, those lands would be placed back in beneficial use and back on the property tax rolls. How long has it been since the feds paid their PILT because of logging and so on and so forth? In the state of Jefferson, with the enabling acts and some of the precedents, the state of Alaska, the precedent that Utah is trying to set, there is a real case for regaining control of federal lands within the county of Butte and the state of Jefferson and putting those lands back in beneficial use and restoring PILT payments to counties through direct timber receipts or mining receipts, so on and so forth. There are 4 businesses on earth from which all products stem: mining, timber, farming and ranching, and energy production. We've been regulated out of 3 of them. Our economy is not suffering because we can't produce things. Our economy is suffering because we're not allowed to produce things. Every week I have people call me and say, if you get this done, I'm moving my business to Jefferson. If you get this done, I'm moving my family to Jefferson. We lost 31,000 jobs last month. The state of Texas gained 30,000. We can set up a constitutional framework that has a regulatory and business environment that will encourage enterprise in the state of Jefferson, and that's how we'll make it without the welfare money.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Please refrain from clapping.
I have a question.
Okay.
Mr. Baird, since you're the authority, it looks like, and they like to clap for you, so may...
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's all right. We deal with this with the marijuana stuff all the time, too. Not to call you as marijuana guys. They just like to clap. A question I have on the public lands deal and some of these other things in our new state here at Jefferson. Being a rancher myself, and I understand this frustration, and I've been dealing with a lot of their stuff with this, too, on a national level. How do you feel by pulling out the state of California, we gain, this is all these regulations you talked about, mostly all federal.
Well,
they're not going away.
That's a great question, because the 10th Amendment is our process to stop that. Literally, if we had a state government that had the backbone to hold the feds to the letter of the 10th Amendment, and we've done this in Siskiyou County a couple of times when U.S. Fish and Wildlife came over the Coho thing, we said, well, who's your data quality assessment officer? And they looked at each other and said, what's that? We said, well, the Regulatory Flexibility Act, the Data Quality Act, demands that your science have integrity and that you have a data quality assessment officer and you be able to prove to the people that the economic impacts of whatever program you propose won't be severe. And they went away, and it's been 2 years. Now, they'll be back, but because we don't have a state constitution that will help us defend our counties. The state of Jefferson that we imagine, the county will have the lion's share of the power. You will be the ones to make decision because these people here put you in those chairs, and if they don't like what you did, they're going to corner you in Walmart and give it to you. And sometimes they'll be right, and sometimes they won't.
I won't go to Walmart ever again.
I wouldn't either. Yeah, it's funny. In all these stories, everything always happens in Walmart. But anyway, so if you have a state constitutional framework that will protect the county and defend against the federal government using the 10th Amendment, the counties will be free to conduct their business as they see fit and as the people direct their elected representatives. We don't have that now. California allows the federal government to break the law pretty much any time they want to.
So it sounds like to me, in the first, say, 20 to 50 years of this new state, a lot of court fees, a lot of suing, a lot of, but with our money, right?
Well,
how are we going to fund that?
Well, first of all, the state of West Virginia argued about Civil War debt for 150 years. They just settled that like 3 weeks ago.
150 years.
Well, yeah.
I've been to West Virginia, so I'm not that excited about this.
Yeah, right.
I wouldn't use it as an example.
Well, I may have changed the boundary line on that one myself, but the point is there wouldn't be thousands and thousands of court cases because Congress appoints committees of separation, and so we would have committees of separation that would work out all the mundane details, who gets this, who gets that, who gets the Caltrans bulldozer. So a lot of those things would not need to be adjudicated. They would be agreed to in advance. And the LAO, the state LAO, says that it would be reasonable and rational for assets of the former California that lie within the new state to be part of that new state because, after all, we were taxpayers when those things were built ourselves. Now, as far as the debt goes, look, even though we don't have representation, we weren't asleep when the money was spent. It is the honorable thing to do to assume our portion of that debt.